can't believe it, but like I said earlier, it is August. I don't know how I feel about that. I don't think I like it. I'm not ready for summer to wrap up, but you blink and it is. So I'm heading back to Miami, and people all over Michigan, students heading back to school. So we're now joined by my former high school principal, Mr. Pat Watson. How are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good, and I have to tell you, I don't know if you remember. You definitely do remember, but when I graduated high school back in 2018, you gave a speech, and the first thing you said was make your bed every single morning. And ever since I graduated high school, I have made my bed every single morning. I take your advice, and a lot of my friends that I graduated with have done the same, and it's just made my life so much better. So I think that is advice that everyone should have. I hope you guys make your bed every morning, because even if you have the worst day in the world, you come home to a made bed. And you're not going to have the worst day in the world if you make your bed. But anyway, so it's now been a year and a half of you as the superintendent of Bloomfield Hills. How has that been? How does that feel?
Yeah, intriguing, interesting, challenging, ever changing. And yeah, like you, I also make my bed. I wish I could take credit for that inspiration, but it actually comes from Admiral McCraven, and I was quoting him in a speech he gave. So it is good advice. So you've accomplished something, if nothing else that day. So it's been intriguing. I think one of the highlights for me coming over is that there are so many former students that either work or live in Bloomfield Hills that I've reconnected with. So it's been a reunion with probably over 50 of my former students, dating back all the way to the class of 1995 and moving forward. So that's been a lot of fun reconnecting.
So we know you were in West Bloomfield for a while. You're the superintendent of Bloomfield Hills now, but let's go way back. Tell us, where did you grow up?
So I grew up in Ann Arbor. Lived most of my life there. I also spent 3 years, about 2.5 years in Canada. But I am an Ann Arbor native. It was a great place to grow up in the 70s and 80s, a great place now. And, I definitely had an amazing experience in school. I graduated from Ann Arbor Huron High School in the 80s, and, things were, you'll hear people might say, I walked through the snow backwards and it was so difficult. No, it really wasn't that difficult in the 80s. There wasn't a lot to worry about. We worried about the Cold War. But then Rocky beat Ivan Drago, so that solved that problem. We worried about POWs and MIA, but then Chuck Norris went to Vietnam in the movie and rescued everyone. Like it was a simpler time with no social media and just not a lot of pressure. I look at the levels of anxiety, depression, and suicidal ideations with our students right now. And there's just so much pressure on all of our students to do well in school and get into a good college and get that ideal dream job. And everyone's on social media. It seems like living their best life is what our kids see. It's just, there's a lot of stress on our students now.
Yeah, 100%. And I envy you for growing up in those simpler times, honestly. There are so many times that I think to myself how much easier life would be without social media. And then, there's, of course, the argument of, oh, well, you can just delete it. Yeah, you can delete it, but then you deal with feeling left out for other reasons. So, I don't know. It's a lot, definitely. But going back to what's going on today, it's been almost 2 years since you accepted your job as the superintendent. So what were some not superstitions, I don't know what I'm thinking. What were some assumptions that you had about that job before you started? And looking back now, almost 2 years later, is there anything that you're like, wow, I can't believe I thought this was what it was going to be like? And obviously with COVID, I'm sure there's a lot of that, but just in general, what were your thoughts 2 years ago and what are they now about this job?
So I came in with some really well-defined plans of what I wanted to do in my first 90 days on the job. And I had this huge plan and I'm excited and I'm like, I'm going to get it done. Like I had tons of plans. Well, 59 days in, we shut schools. And the majority of those plans have stopped. So people will ask me, what's it like to be a superintendent? I say, I don't really know. Because what I thought the job was going to be, COVID has changed that. So once we kind of have a handle of COVID, I can tell you what the job is going to be like. I'm proud of the things we've been able to accomplish, our curriculum work, our social emotional learning. We passed a $200 million bond, all this going on with COVID. So I'm proud of what we've been able to accomplish. But a large part of my day is reading, researching, talking to other school districts about COVID mitigation strategies, instructional models within, those confines. So I'm excited for one day of having the opportunity to really see what the job is like when COVID isn't one of the primary things that we're talking about.
Definitely. And one thing I can say, I know that as a principal, you were always very good at having those interpersonal relationships with students, and even things as simple as you knew students' names. A lot of principals don't really care, but being superintendent now, you're not going to know the names of every kid in your school district, and obviously the relationships can't be as personal. So do you miss those personal relationships that you were able to have when you had maybe 1/5 of the students, or even less than 1/5 as you do now? Or how have those relationships changed, and what do you do to try and maintain those relationships?
So definitely that's an important part, right? That's, to me, I've always been about personal relationships with staff and students and investing time there. So prior to COVID, majority of my focus, my first 59 days, was being in buildings and shadowing students in every building and really seeing from a student perspective what it's like in building those relationships. It was a little more difficult, obviously, when school wasn't in session. And then when we came back, I visit buildings as often as possible. We also have board interns and a student advisory council that works with our board interns. So I am getting to know them extremely well and meet with them bi-weekly. And so that's been something that I've really enjoyed doing. But knowing that this school year, again, who knows, everything can change with COVID. But right now, like all of us in Oakland County, we're planning to return that first day of school. So I'm looking forward to pick up where I left off and to continue to build those relationships with students moving forward.
So during the height of the pandemic, when school was completely virtual, Bloomfield Hills started school at 9 a.m., which was a lot different than the usual start time at 7:25 a.m.
Right.
So what was the feedback from students and parents on this? Why was that decision made? And what are the plans for a start time going into the next school year?
So the students loved it, right? You're starting school at 9, you're getting done at 2:10, 2:15, same time you would otherwise, which was great. And part of the pandemic learning of last year, we were allowed flexibility. There was no mandated amount of time you had to be in the building, no hours, no days. And so that was very beneficial. Going into next school year, we've adjusted the start time from 7:25 to 8 o'clock. And that is something we feel will be beneficial for students. We're also going to be offering quite a few online classes and we have block scheduling, which I know you're familiar with, online courses for students first and second block, so that they can kind of do them at their own leisure and then have the opportunity to come into school even later. Ideally, what the students would have liked is keeping the 9 o'clock start and still getting out around 2:15, 2:20. But now that the mandated days and hours are back for next year, that's impossible. So once we share with the students that we can't keep the same hours, we can start at 9, but we're not going to get out until roughly 4. The response, well, we don't want that. That's not what we're looking for. So we're going to keep looking at it. I think the goal is to see if we can do an 8:30 start a couple years down the road when we reconfigure our K through 12 buildings. But at least for next year, from day one, it will be an 8 o'clock start instead of a 7:25 start for our students.
I do think that's interesting because even before COVID, I always thought to myself, I started high school at 7:10, and I've never heard of a high school starting earlier than that. I mean, we started earlier. Even 7:25, I think, is earlier than most schools start. So West Bloomfield 7:10 was very early, but I was always okay with it because we got out at 2 and I had the whole day. So yes, it sucked waking up super early, but if someone would have said, okay, we can start school at 9 and then you're going to have to get out at 4, I would have never done it. I was done with my extracurriculars at 4, and then you still have the night to do whatever you want. So that was definitely something that was fantastic. And it's just so crazy you're saying that you're going to offer more online classes. I can't imagine having online classes when I was in high school. But what is
Right.
that? You said students are going to have the opportunity to come in later, but not everyone has a car, and there are underclassmen that don't drive yet. So what's that going to look like for either underclassmen or students that don't have cars? Is there going to be some type of place, I don't know exactly the ins and outs of this big, beautiful building you guys have, but will there be places, if they still need to come at the start time, that they can hang out and do their online classes in the building rather than having to drive themselves in later?
Absolutely. That option is still come in the building and do the work because you need to take the bus in the morning or your ride has to be there first thing in the morning. That opportunity is still going to be there. There's no question about that. So that's something that is going to be available for our students. And, you think 7:10's early, years ago when you were in elementary school, there used to be a 0 hour. So we actually had the first class of the day at 6:05 in the morning. For those who wanted to take that additional hour, which was one of the reasons there was a move to block scheduling, was to give students more option and not bring them in so early. But the research is clear, right? We know that, based on sleep patterns and circadian rhythms, that students should be starting school a little later. But how late you go, there's always trade-offs. And like you said, yeah, it was early at 7:10. I mean, it's the earliest one in Oakland County, but you also got out the earliest, which allowed you to extracurriculars earlier, get home earlier, go to a job earlier. So there are some trade-offs with it.
Now, this is going off topic a little bit, but I want to talk about something a little more lighthearted because we spend so much time talking about the pandemic and all you have to deal with, but talking about times that school gets out, extracurriculars. What a lot of people might not know is that you were a successful coach during your time at West Bloomfield, and particularly with baseball. So tell us about that. Do you miss that ever? You have to.
I do. So I was involved in educational athletics, from 1990 all the way until 2019. Even when I took the position here in Bloomfield Hills, in November of 2019, I was still coaching at West Bloomfield during that time. So I do miss that aspect. I'm officially retired from coaching. I enjoyed coaching, in West Bloomfield for a very long time, from 95 all the way until 2019. It's something I could see in retirement and volunteering and getting back into that. I have fond memories. I can't tell you what I had for dinner a week ago, but I can go through the semifinal game pitch by pitch of 2001 and tell you what happened in every inning like it was yesterday. So it definitely has left a memorable impression with me in my life.
And what about your childhood as a baseball player? Do you remember playing high school baseball? Were you good?
I do remember. I was great at keeping stats.
What position did you play?
Pitcher and third.
Okay.
The coach called me the up 10, down 10 guy. If we were up 10 or down 10, it was my opportunity to put down the scorebook and go into the game. So
I love it. Oh my gosh.
I understood what needed to be done. I could tell you what needed to be done. I couldn't always athletically execute at the level of some of my classmates, put it that way.
Okay, so you're a better coach and superintendent.
Yeah.
It's fine. It's fine.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, just a couple more things with COVID. But what are your thoughts on the CDC recommending masks for students? Have you declared what that's going to look like in the fall for in-person? And, what's your reaction to Michigan's response that they're going to be recommended but not required to wear masks?
Yeah, so we sent a letter out on June 30th letting the community know that we were recommending but not mandating masks following the CDC recommendation. MDHHS has come out, has recommended the same thing. And there's all kinds of talk about this should or shouldn't happen. To me, from where I sit, I'm not a health expert. And, if these recommendations were intended to be mandates, then I would expect our healthcare providers to do what's expected and mandate them. I'm watching this other states, and I know Michigan's, COVID numbers are a little lower, but I'm watching other states and their governor and their health departments look at their data and mandate masks. We've seen that in Oregon. We've seen it in California. We've seen it in Illinois and Louisiana just this week. And I understand in Michigan, the governor can't make that. But we also know that the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, and then here locally, our Oakland County Health Division can mandate masks. And if that is the intent of the rule, I would hope they would do so. I've taken 1 million college classes. None of them were in epidemiology or virology. And I get that individuals are coming forward that have those degrees saying, yes, it should be mandated. The expectation is the school should mandate it. Well, then that's what we expect our healthcare providers to let us know that it should be done. I've got parents like every community that feel they should or shouldn't. But right now we are telling everyone that we are recommending but not requiring. And everyone wants to know, well, is that going to stay? Will it be that way September 8th, the first day of school? Will it be that way tomorrow? Each day with COVID, unfortunately, is a new day. So there is not one thing that is going to change or not change. Everything is always open for research, investigation, and decision-making on a daily basis, which is right. As a parent of 3 myself, that's not what you want to hear. You want to hear decisions have been made, it's not going to change, you know what the school year is going to look like, and you can move forward. But unfortunately, with COVID, we don't have control of that. That's not the position we're in.
Pat, so you have reached maybe what is the pinnacle of working in the education department, being a superintendent. But at what point did the teaching bug hit you? Were there any teachers that inspired you that said, "Hey, that's what I want to do for a career"?
Oh, I had some great teachers that really inspired me. Starting in 8th grade, whether I had Mr. Cantrell, Dottie Davis, Mr. Smith. I mean, I was very fortunate to have teachers that cared about me, that looked out for me. I can't tell you maybe what I learned in some of their classes, but I can tell you what they did for me on a personal level and the stories they shared that, made my day better. Or, the times they sought me out in the hall because they knew it was going to be a rough week for me to check on me to see how I was doing. So I wanted the opportunity, starting in the 8th grade where I made the decision I want to grow up to be a teacher because I want to have the opportunity to give back and care for students the way some staff members did for me.
And now being a principal and being the superintendent, what do you see in young students now? Is wanting to be a teacher, is that still a goal of a lot of students? Is it on the back burner? I mean, how do you inspire young people to go into this field?
It is definitely on the back burner. Education is really changed. I feel I'm part of the last generation of, the 30 years and out, where you got a job as an educator, you're going to stay 30 or more years, and then you'll decide to retire. It's become very transient. People not only leave the profession quicker than before, but people also will leave for non-educational jobs, or they'll leave for a different district. I know as principal at West Bloomfield High School over a 6-year period, over 50% of the staff I hired because there are that many people that changed. I think back to my first decade when I was there and almost no one left. There was an occasional retiree, but the idea that somebody would leave and go to a different district for a job didn't happen. That's commonplace now. And I think it's going to be really difficult to attract young people to the profession. You can look at the pay, and that was never too big an issue before. But then you had the other things, like you had a pension. Well, you don't really have that anymore. You had health insurance you didn't have to pay for. Well, now you have to pay for your health insurance. Respect for teachers, I think, was a lot higher when I first got into the profession compared to now. And class sizes were smaller. A lot of places, they're larger now. So I think for a lot of young people, they see all these additional challenges that didn't exist before. And there's more opportunities elsewhere, they believe, and so they're choosing to go elsewhere. The days of going to a job fair and having it packed and having so many candidates you don't know which one to select are also over. I know we're interviewing now, and based on the lack of applicants, we're going to start potentially with a couple positions with a sub in place, potentially, depending on what we can do this last month.
What I will say is, As hard as that is to hear, and I'm sure for you as someone that's so passionate about this, if there is less interest, I would hope and think that the people who are interested are really, really passionate about it and not just doing it because it's an option. So I definitely think that that can be helpful for students, for knowing that the people who are in the classrooms are really going to impact them and be inspiring. Just before we let you go, is there anything else that you want to share? I know we diverted a little today and talked about some other things. So is there anything else important for the people of your students to know, or just about the plans to go back in the fall, even though they're changing every day?
Just to stay tuned, to be flexible, to understand we're trying to make the best decisions we have with the information we have available. And that regardless of the decision, we understand that people are going to be upset, right? It doesn't matter what the decision is, it's going to be upset. So I'll share that. And then on a different note, it's great seeing you again. Please tell your family I say hello, and I hope everyone's doing well. It's been a couple years.
I know I will, absolutely. So nice catching up. So you too, thank you so much, and have a great it's Thursday, so I can say have a great weekend. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.